why fund managers can't beat the S&P 500? Because they're sheep, and sheep get slaughtered.
The numbers told the story, they always do.
Money never sleeps, pal.
Because all we care about is getting fucking rich. You connect points I don't even know to look for.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information.
Public's out there throwing darts at a board, sport. I don't throw darts at a board. I bet on sure things.
Welcome, Karma Clan, to the next and final division preview here on the Sports Trading Desk. I'm your host, Brett Matthew, with my co-host, Zach James. Corey Larson taking the night off, but we will be your lead strategist this year for the Bet Karma Sportfolios. Definitely follow us throughout the year. We beat every single market competitor in performance in 2019, kind of blew everybody away. So definitely be on the lookout for both our core Sportfolio for those who don't want to take a ton of risk, and our aggressive Sportfolio for those who have a little bit more riskier appetite. Both outperformed competitors across the board last year. Core up 10%, aggressive up in excess of 40%. And again, by taking minimal risks. We aren't betting our entire bankrolls here. This is just pure active selection and isolating moments of pure value and capitalizing on it. So that's what we do. But for tonight, we will be previewing our final division, the NFC South, giving you our preliminary thoughts on the Falcons, the Panthers, the Saints, and the Bucs. So Zach, let's start from the bottom, at least according to market expectation, and that is the Carolina Panthers. So how is the market pricing the Panthers?
The Panthers, everything has changed Panthers except Christian McCaffrey. So the Panthers are sitting at a 5.5 season total. And obviously their division odds are pretty low, 2150, and then 14,000 to win the Super Bowl. So, this team is obviously, market sentiment is way down, rightfully so. They have a whole new coaching staff, new quarterback. They lost 6 defensive starters from last year. So needless to say, there's a lot of changeover. There's a lot of low expectations. And, to kind of dig into it a little bit, I see both sides. I think this is a year where there's no reason to get cute taking Panthers early, but this team is also going to be more competent in the long run than I think the market thinks. I don't know if they're really going to surpass the 5.5 wins, but I did some research with Matt Rule, the new coach that hails from the college ranks with Baylor most recently. I like his style. I've listened to him speak a little bit. The issue I see happening is because of this year's training camp, they had 4 weeks to be in person. So they don't have a lot of time to really get this team settled in, especially with so many new starters. So there's, no matter how good or bad of a coach he is, the deck is completely stacked against him. So that's my biggest caveat with this team early in the season. But what about you, bro? What do you think in general from your kind of macro view of this team?
Well, my long-term macro view of the Panthers organization is very bullish, perhaps surprising to our audience. And I actually wrote an article about this last year and posted on Bet Karma after they fired Coach Rivera, that the new owner of the Panthers within the last few years, David Tepper, again, one of my idols in traditional finance. He's a hedge fund manager for Appaloosa Asset Management, one of the best investors the hedge fund game has ever seen. In 2009, one of the worst, coming out of one of the worst market performances in history. He made over 100% in his hedge fund, personally made $2 billion in 2009, mostly by investing in banks in 2009 when nobody wanted to touch him. So I think he's got a great acumen at understanding and appreciating and being decisive and investing in undervalued assets. And I think that he's going to do that with the Panthers. I think he's got a unique eye to the sport. And what I think a lot of people don't appreciate is as these traditional finance people and hedge funders specifically come into sports and buy teams, their teams end up being really good, really fast. So the Warriors and the Bucks, both owned by hedge funders, both turned around those organizations quite quickly and made them into the teams that they are today. And I think that people, misremember that the Warriors and the Bucks that were always good. No, they weren't. These were teams that missed the playoffs every single year. They were consistently bad. But again, the new ownership came in, got new coaching, changed the cultures, and had a new perspective to the game. And I think that the Panthers are going to follow that pattern. For 2020 is a different story. Now, David Tepper signed Coach Rule to a 7-year contract. So it indicates that he understands that he's not expecting a turnaround performance here in year 1, maybe not even year 2. But I think, what Tepper is going to be looking for is signs of improvement. So that means I think you're going to see games where the Panthers show flashes. I think especially the offense, because there is talent here. Obviously, they might have the best running back in the NFL. So you can't just ignore that. Their offensive line is mediocre, but it's not atrocious. Matt Paradise at center, has been around for a long time. He's kind of been underperforming, but they have Russell Okung. He flirted with opting out due to COVID, but he is going to play. So that's going to be a big save there. Again, not a ton of talent, so it's definitely is a weakness, but it's not the worst in the NFL. And then at wide receiver, they signed Robbie Anderson, have DJ Moore. He's got a high ceiling. Robbie Anderson can definitely take the top off the defense. Curtis Samuel is, he's been struggling, kind of underperforming. Haven't read a lot of good things about him in training camp. But I think the offense is going to have the ability to put points on the board. Teddy Bridgewater went undefeated last year as the Saints starting quarterback. Granted, he had a much better, more robust and experienced coaching staff with a lot of offensive talent. And of course, Drew Brees coaching him the whole way. So that definitely helped him, and not a lot was expected of him. It's not like he put up Pro Bowl numbers over the course of those games last year, but he's serviceable. I think he can play football in a way and not make a ton of mistakes. And if that's how their offense is, especially with a very weak defense, I think this team can surprise in moments. I don't think this is going to be as bad as some people think, but I think they're probably still going to be, certainly a bottom 2-3 team.
Yeah, I think their defense is probably going to be the worst in the NFL, especially, they're going to have to go up against Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Matt Ryan 6 times throughout the season. So they're very likely going to get torched consistently. The thing is, Matt Rule brought in Joe Brady, who's a 30-year-old upstart, the passing offensive coordinator for LSU. So he hasn't even been a full offensive coordinator. And at first I was skeptical that would work. But based on what you just said, Brett, about kind of the owner's mantra of how they view, being futuristic, so to speak, and how they manage their funds, their teams, et cetera. The good thing is the reason they brought in Teddy Bridgewater is, Joe Brady worked with the Saints and Sean Payton. So he saw what Sean Payton saw, which is actually a very good sign to me of, Joe Brady's a very sharp guy, and Matt Rule is sharp enough to know that guy's a sharp guy. He didn't know Joe Brady. He had his first phone call with him, in February, and then he got hired and met him essentially once. COVID happened, and then didn't see him again until basically training camp started. So as far as physical, because, a lot of times, his defensive coordinator, Phil Snow, Matt Rule's worked with for years, et cetera, with Baylor, but with Joe Brady, hey, you're young, you're a hot shot. Like, we're going to roll the dice. Like, let's bring in some fresh ideas and let's get this rolling. So, offensively, once they get settled in, because obviously with COVID and no preseason, it may take some time. But, this offense could be towards the latter half of the season one of, a very potent offense. Mm-hmm. And it'll have to be because their defense is going to there's so much turnover. Tons. That's going to take – and there's not a lot of talent there anyways. So, that's the biggest caveat with this team.
Yeah, and in the year where continuity probably gets a bit of an edge, not only is the defense lacking in talent, like you said, but there was tons of turnover. There's almost a fresh face at almost every single starting position, starting with the loss of Luke Kuechly, their defensive quarterback and leader. That's a massive loss. Also lost Mario Addison, their best cornerback, James Bradbury. Lost Bruce Irvin, lost Gerald McCoy. Obviously lost Eric Reed, Dontari Poe. And then on offense, lost Greg Olsen, Trey Turner. So just complete turnover this year. And Coach Rule, has turned around programs in college football and has done a great job doing so, but he never did it in the first year. And never did it in the second year. It was the third year when he really turned around the programs that were miserable and into bowl-oriented teams. So I think, you don't have to you can be bullish on this organization for the future and still recognize that this is going to be a transition year. It's going to be super tough and probably will serve them well, like putting them in a position, especially for the draft. So let's move on to, and then I think lastly, as we do move on, is one of the reasons why the Panthers will probably underperform. It's just because this might be one of the best divisions in the NFL. So moving on to the Falcons, who I think have the possibility, if things break right, to win this division. So how is the market pricing the Falcons at?
Well, the Falcons, if you think they're going to win the division, there's some really good price action for you on the Falcons. They're 7.5 as far as win total, 960 to win the division, and 4,800 to win the Super Bowl.
So what are your thoughts on them?
Well, interestingly,
my bullish propaganda.
Yeah, I like your bullish propaganda on the Falcons. Well, so obviously the last 2 years have been struggles for the Falcons. Some interesting things happened last year. There was a point in time when this team was 1-6, 1-7, and it was a foregone conclusion that Dan Quinn was going to be fired during the season. Arthur Blank said, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to see what happens and make decisions based on that. So, nothing too flashy, but Dan Quinn basically moved Raheem Morris closer to defense coordinator. And that actually changed the fate of this team after the bye. So they were giving up 31 points a game the first 8 games. The last 8 games, they were giving up a little over 18. So, that's almost 2 touchdown difference. Now, granted, the competition was a little less, but
that's a big jump.
They got a little healthier. They got a little more in sync. They got a new defensive coordinator, switched halfway in the season, and they basically saved Dan Quinn's job. So it's interesting because it actually shows several things. There's a lot I'm throwing at you, but what it shows is this team wants to buy into Dan Quinn. They believe in him. The owner believes in him. Now, Arthur Blank's a nice guy, so I think he kind of, will believe in anything. But, Dan Quinn doesn't have bad relationships with his players. So we know he's not a great coach from that Super Bowl chaos. But his players buy into him. So I would say he's probably a top 15 coach overall. And Raheem Morris is an underrated defensive coach. So I think this defense, the key being them staying healthy, if they can just perform halfway between last year, between their 18 points and their 31 points, this very well, like you said, maybe they could squeak out the division. Because the Bucs are going to maybe take some time to gel. If Kamara's contract situation with the Saints gets in a weird place, he gets traded maybe, who knows? So it is up for grabs. I mean, this team was in the Super Bowl 3 years ago with Kyle Shanahan as the offensive coordinator. Now, obviously, Dirk Cutter is a big downgrade at offensive coordinator. But if they're healthy and if Gurley is just a little better than last year, he's still a top 15 back if he's a little better than last year. So if his knee is a little healthier and he doesn't get dinged up, I mean, this team has a lot of upside overall.
Yeah. No, I think it has massive upside. Again, to the point of outperforming the highly favorited Saints and Bucs. And so just to substantiate some of the things, I mean, basically every single thing I started reading and started researching about the Falcons, be like, I see. So to your point, the defense dramatically improved once Raheem Morris took over. And it was addition by subtraction. I think, Dan Quinn got to focus more so on being a head coach because Dan Quinn was the one also coordinating the defense prior. And so it was just stretched too thin. So I think with Morris as a defensive coordinator that, it revealed positive results instantly. But in addition to the defense playing much better, the offense actually also played much better over the course of the second half of the season. So they went from scoring 20.5 points a game to 27 points a game. So almost a full touchdown more over the latter half of the season. That is, dramatically meaningful, especially when they're giving up a touchdown less than they were at the beginning of the season, as you mentioned. Falcons also had like 7 sacks through the first half of the season and then had 20 sacks over the last half of the season. So just like it was really night and day. The other thing is they have talent, a lot of talent at offensive line, but they just constantly struggle with injuries. So their ideal starting offensive line played for 45 snaps last year. So it was just constantly a rotation of guys coming and going and missing time, and then another guy missing time, and then another guy coming back, etc. And then their best offensive lineman, Chris Lindstrom, he missed 12 games, the first 12 games, didn't come back till the last 4 games when they played some of their best football. And then as a consequence of all this turnover and back and forth and instability offensive on the line, Matt Ryan was sacked 48 times, the most he was sacked ever in his career. So I think we can almost narrow this down to at least one of the biggest factors for the team's underperformance was the offensive line, and on defense was poor coaching. And then as both these factors improved, then the team itself got not just better, dramatically better. I mean, they became one of the best teams in the NFL. And so you're going to have Morris already starting the season at defensive coordinator. And then if you can get a healthy line, because, Matt Ryan is not a mobile quarterback. You put pressure on him, he struggles. But if you give him time, especially with the assets that he has, Julio Jones still probably the best wide receiver in the NFL. Riley Ridley, another quarterback, or another wide receiver, or Calvin Ridley. Riley Ridley is his brother on the Bears. In his second year, going to provide, again, more experience. And then Gage also really started to come around last year. So I think he can be a decent third wide receiver. And then they also signed Hayden Hurst, who I really liked on Baltimore. I feel like he really just got underutilized. And so I think he's going to be more than a sufficient replacement for the loss of Austin Hooper. And then on defense, signed Dante Fowler, drafted A.J. Terrell from Clemson in the secondary. Keanu Neal, one of the best safeties in the game. He's kind of missed the better half of the last 2 seasons due to injuries. If he can stay healthy, there's a lot of promise to this team. It's not going to be due to lack of talent if this team doesn't perform exceptionally well. It's going to be because of questionable coaching and injuries. So if the coaching can be solidified, which it seems like it has, and if they can stay healthy, it's hard to make the case that this team can't be better than the Bucs and the Saints.
Well, and what's interesting is the schedule aligns perfectly for them to start the season much better than the last two seasons, because I'll start at the end. Their last 6 games, 4 of those games they play Tampa Bay twice, they play New Orleans twice, and they play Kansas City. So I think that's actually 7. But out of the last 6-7 weeks, they play New Orleans, Tampa Bay, and KC. So the last half of the season is where they're most likely to struggle. So the first half is going to be pivotal for this team to get off the snide, to have it all together, and gain some momentum before the last half of the season really shows us, are they for real?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of my but wait moment is, I think Atlanta could start hot. They could go 6-1, 5-2, whatever it is, get to their bye, and then they actually may have their collapse towards the end of the season, especially if they have any key injuries. So something to monitor in general is, I wouldn't get overly high on the Falcons in the first half of the season if they do really well, because the back half of their schedule is brutal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just something to be mindful of in the fervor of, if the Falcons look so good early on, if they are cohesive. I'm not sure it's going to translate to the back half of the season, though they could still be very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might not want to get too hot on them. Well, and that's all the thing. It's all about your current view, capturing mispricing versus the market's view. So if the Falcons start off super hot, obviously the market's going to start to overprice them, and then it's going to be much less attractive. But the thing is, for the Falcons, I mean, I'd much rather probably play Drew Brees and Tom Brady in the final weeks of the season rather than the first weeks of the season, as they'd be much more fresh. And I think, it's at any point in time that you might see a drop off from Brady and Brees. I mean, I think we've already seen it from Brees, maybe less so from Brady, but I think at their age, it can just take 1 week from week 10 to week 11, and you kind of see a slightly different quarterback that just doesn't move the same, doesn't throw the same, doesn't see defenses the same. And then of course, the Falcons also had one of the worst running games in the NFL last year. And I think it probably was partially due to the ineptitude of the offensive line and the injuries at offensive line, but also Devontae Freeman. I don't even think he's found a team at this point in time. So he's, still out of the league at this point in time. So, again, to your point, if Gurley can play even a resemblance of his former self, that could be a massive improvement. And hey, if he could somehow pull an Adrian Peterson and he is old Gurley, I think you watch out for this team. The Falcons are almost, if things break right, are almost my 49ers of 2020. Because if you remember last year, Niners 4 wins, in 2018, and I had predicted that they were going to go 13-3, which they did. I thought they would win the West, which they did. I thought they were likely to go to the Super Bowl, which they did. So Falcons are kind of my team this year. Not necessarily that I'm making those same sorts of bold predictions, but I think the distance between the market expectation and the ceiling for this team is the widest that I've seen of any team in the NFL. Because obviously, even last year for the Niners hit their ceiling last year. Like, they played the best version of themselves that they possibly could have been. So I think the ceiling on the Falcons is similarly high. So let's move on. Let's move on to the Saints, because I know this is a team that you and I we don't like strongly disagree with one another, but we both have a slightly different view on them. So how's the market pricing them? And then let's talk about how you're pricing them.
Yeah, so the Saints are at 10.5 wins on the season. I think they're minus 175 to win the division and plus 1250 to win the Super Bowl. So, I think that's all fair. I think Saints are probably a 10 to 11 win team on the season. So I think that number is just right. what I love about the Saints, especially coming into this season, is their cohesiveness. They're still top 10 in continuity from last season to this season, return most players on both sides of the ball. The biggest concern actually probably for this team on the whole is Drew Brees getting old. And that's that's their Achilles heel. And I think we even saw some of that. I think we've seen that actually in the playoffs the last 2 years. Is the biggest disappointment has been Drew Brees. So, I think for this season, you're likely going to have a similar scenario where Saints are going to be probably fairly good early on both sides of the ball. But I think what's going to determine the Saints' fate this year is their defense. Their defense, I said Drew Brees, but more so their defense in the playoffs has kind of let them down the last few years. So their defense plays really well during the regular season and kind of just doesn't make any plays in the playoffs, and somehow loses to a terrible Rams performance, loses to the Vikings in a terrible fashion. Wait, didn't that happen twice now in the last 3 years? So, I think this offense is going to be just fine, especially if Alvin Kamara comes back from his little contract dispute. I love the addition of Emmanuel Sanders. I think that's, as you saw last year, he came right into the 49ers, performed brilliantly, was a key to getting them to the Super Bowl. So I think he's going to fit right in with Michael Thomas. I think probably their best number 2 receiver since Brandon Cooks. And, so from top to bottom, both sides of the ball, I just don't see this team taking any steps back other than Drew Brees. I think the defense will actually be better overall. So, the sky's the limit for the Saints. If they can get past their Achilles heel in the playoffs, they can get to the Super Bowl. The only thing stopping them is really like a Tampa Bay, Seattle type team, really, in my opinion. So what do you think?
I think every single thing that you mentioned is fair. The thing is it's not off market. I don't think there's any value to be had there. And I know we're not necessarily talking about what's a great bet. So I think, we're just giving our evaluations of the team. I just think that, that evaluation is market consensus. And, everybody and their square mother loves the Emmanuel Sanders signing. I think people think that
it's a good signing.
Like it's the signing of the decade and it's going to push this team over the edge. Having a second wide receiver, to your point, the offense has not necessarily been the reason for their breakdowns later in the season and in the playoffs. That's been the defense, and to maybe a broader point, coaching. And, until, Andy Reid got a generational talent, he wasn't able to really win a Super Bowl until, he got Mahomes, even though he was always a great coach and always put together a great team, could never really get them over the edge. I don't know if this Alvin Kamara issue is going to resolve itself. Maybe it does. But if it doesn't, I think that's a massive loss. Supposedly they have a lot of faith in Latavius Murray and Ty Montgomery. Okay, sure. But losing Kamara, I think Murray and Montgomery are great supplemental pieces to have in conjunction with Kamara, but are not replacements for Kamara. And then, I honestly, Traquan Smith got hurt last year. I think he's got a high ceiling. I think he could be a better receiver than Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders has struggled with injuries. I don't even know if he's going to really make it through this season. I think it's unwise to handicap it in a way with the expectation that he will. I think Jared Cook, has gotten a lot of positive written about him. He's going on the verge of 32. I just don't know how much more you can expect from him. Again, great offensive line, great defense. It's hard to find holes in here, but what I would say is just sometimes things just don't come together the way you expect them to. And usually it's due to bad coaching, and the Saints don't have bad coaching, that's for sure. But, I've been waiting for the Peyton Manningization of Drew Brees, and it hasn't fully happened yet, but we've seen glimmers of Brees just having a completely dead arm, and he has rejuvenation, and he's come back and kind of spit in the faces of the Bears like myself. But, Brees got a nice mid-season break last year with, missing 6-7 games. I think that really helped preserve his health and his talents and all that, and really allowed him to perform better down the stretch. Is that going to be the plan every year? Let him play 10 games? If they're going to want him to play the full season, I don't know if he's got the stamina to do so. And I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for Drew Brees to get Manningized and just show up dead in the latter half of the season. And with this type of offense, granted, Thomas is a great slot receiver, going over the middle, gets one of the best wide receivers, to capture yards after the catch in the NFL. But and that's the other thing, is Thomas and Sanders are almost a little bit of a redundant talents as well. Like what do they bring to the Saints offense that they didn't already have? I'm not sure. So I don't know if there's a bunch of synergies brought by Sanders. At least it fits into Brees' game, which is mostly dump off passes. So one of the interesting stats that I saw last year was, Brees threw the fewest passes over 20 yards as he had in his whole entire career last year, which goes to quantify some of these qualitative observations that I've been making about Brees. So I think the team, again, well coached, tons of talent across the offense and defense. So it's hard to say the team's going to suck, and I'm definitely not saying that. But this is going to be a tough division with the Bucs and the Falcons. The Saints showed moments last year where they didn't show up and lost games that they shouldn't have. Mostly as a 7-point favorite at home in a wild card game versus the Vikings and lose. There's something missing from this team, and I wouldn't be surprised if it continues to show up and demonstrate itself in 2020. So lastly, let's wrap up on the Tampa Bay Bucs. Obviously, tons of euphoria and excitement around the Bucs. I personally am excited. I am so curious to see how this offense is going to play out. Week 1, you're going to see Saints and Bucs. I'm super excited. I am personally a huge Tom Brady fan. I love the talent that has surrounded him. This is like 2007 Patriots level talent that Tom Brady has around him. When you really think about it too, since 2007 has Tom Brady had this level, this caliber of weapons at his disposal? Bill Belichick constantly surrounds Brady with either scrubs or kind of these underrated talents that, Brady's got to act as Michael Jordan and make everyone around him better. He's not going to have to necessarily do that this year. So let's quantify exactly how excited the markets are about the Bucs. What's the pricing on the Bucs, and what are your preliminary thoughts on the Bucs, Zach?
If this was a normal year without COVID, the Bucs at 9.5, I would look to bet that over. Because playing the Panthers, that should be 2 guaranteed wins right there. At minimum, they should split the rest of the division. So you're looking at 4 wins. You're almost halfway there. They're minus 131 to win the division, which I think is actually a pretty good price as well if you really, really like them. And then they're plus 1,300 to win the Super Bowl. So obviously the good thing about the Bucs this year, now every team wants to win the Super Bowl, but the Bucs are in legit position to it's Super Bowl or bust. So they're gunning to win it all. There's not going to be any kind of we struggle, we give up. No, they're all in until the end. So that's at least a good thing to know. And like what you said, the biggest Achilles heel of this team, honestly, is the secondary could use a little help, but they have some pieces that are fairly strong. But it is really their running game is will they have the kind of backs that Brady has now grown accustomed to? Now, it may not matter because, like you brought up 2007, there was a time when the joke of the Patriots was they don't need running backs. There was a period in Tom Brady's career where, can you even name the running backs before Corey Dillon? They never had
about Corey Dillon.
They never exactly. They never have a stalwart running back. Their most impressive running backs have really been the James White of recent, where the dump off passes and when Deion Lewis was with them, these kind of dynamic pass catchers out of the backfield. But pre the last 5 years, pre Josh McDaniels, that was never really a part of their offense. It was always Tom Brady just throwing the ball down the field. And that's kind of what he has here. So they're going to try to work in, getting LaShawn McCoy maybe, and Ronald Jones. But, the real threats, to your point, is, you have Gronk, you have O.J. Howard, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Scooter Wilson apparently is getting all Edelman with Tom Brady. So there's a lot for Tom Brady to play with here, and he's all in. He makes this whole team better. Everybody in that building, he's a 6-time Super Bowl champion quarterback, best quarterback ever, all this stuff. I mean, this whole team is going to be bought in and going to put that much extra focus and effort into their game plan and into their playing, that the ceiling is, to me, as high as any team in the NFL. And it really is going to come down to, is the defense going to really put it together? Because they have talent everywhere. Some of it's kind of piecemealed, because they have some older players like Sue and Jason Pierre-Paul, but, they have a stellar linebacking core. So if that secondary holds up, obviously stay healthy, I just don't see a lot of weakness on this team other than running back. And yeah, it's just it's really, the question is will it gel? Will it gel? Will it come together? Will all the pieces fit? Because they have all the pieces. So that's the key.
Yeah, I would isolate. Yeah, I think you make some good points, and I would isolate the 3 key weaknesses that I'd be looking for in the Bucs to see if there's improvement above expectation is, to your point, running back, the offensive line, and the secondary. I think everywhere else is rivals, either some of the best in the league or, definitely in the top half of the league. They have great players on the line and in the middle to get pressure on the quarterback and to defend. I think they have some of the best linebacking crop in the NFL with Devin White, Levante David, and Shaq Barrett. And then, of course, as you mentioned, they have Sue and JPP up front, along with Vita Vea. They got great depth. And then, obviously, on offense, probably some of the best, 1-2 punch at receiver in Evans and Godwin. Then he has that familiarity with Gronk that I think will be helpful. I think Gronk is, maybe not going to be as used as much as maybe some people think that he is. I haven't seen any kind of over-unders on his receptions or receiving yards, but I can pretty much guarantee you that whatever it is, you should probably bet it under, because I think he's going to be a situational and more so a role player. I think they want to be able to get the most out of him over the course of the year, and probably want to really capitalize on his talents down the stretch of the year. So again, I think he's going to be used in moments throughout the first 10 plus weeks of the season. And they can afford to do that because they have O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate behind him, who are starters in their own right. I think, O.J. Howard has been definitely a disappointment from the talent that he really has. But I think Tom Brady will definitely, as he does with almost everybody that comes in contact with him and plays on an offense with him, is he can get the most out of him. And I think he'll do that out of O.J. Howard. And then Cameron Brate, again, a legitimate starting tight end. So they have 3 starting tight ends on their team. So they don't need to use Gronk all the time. They can use him in select moments. They can use him inside the red zone in a 2 or 3 tight end formation and be real nightmares for defenses. I don't think he's going to be a guy, though, that gets, 500 yards and 8 touchdowns and 40 catches. He's going to be like that special situations player, and he's going to be potent at it. And then, of course, just the wide receivers is going to be great for Tom Brady. Tom Brady, to my point earlier about Drew Brees, Tom Brady actually, at least from an analytics perspective, has not been able to really flesh out any discernible weakness in his arm strength, especially when it comes to throwing the ball deep. So he actually had very impressive numbers throwing the ball deep last year. In fact, some of the best numbers he's had in 5 years. So, that is, eye-opening. And that was with, one of the worst kind of wide receiver crews really in the NFL, very limited talent, especially with Edelman having a relatively down year and also being certainly past his prime. But now he's got Evans and Godwin both in their primes. And then to your point, like having Scotty Miller, Justin Watson, Taylor Witt-Johnson also getting a lot of like positive review out of training camp, all kind of fitting that Wes Welker mold, kind of building this offense around kind of how, different versions of the offenses that Tom Brady has really excelled at over the course of his career, all put together into one offense. I think LaShawn McCoy will be, could be good in spots like he was last year with the Chiefs. Certainly not going to be an every down back. Ronald Jones has had his ups and downs, struggled. He's had struggles blocking. He's had struggles catching. That is not good for Tom Brady. So I don't know how much he's going to play unless he dramatically improves on those 2 fronts. So I've been hearing good things about the rookie Keyshawn Vaughn as well. So we'll see how he fits into the system. But yeah, running back, definitely one of the weaker components. And then the offensive line too is just, it's average. It's average at best. And, Winston threw a lot of interceptions last year, but he at least had the mobility to move around. Sometimes he would hold on to the ball too long, so you couldn't always necessarily blame the offensive line for all the sacks and the pressures that he took last year. But I think, this is not the Patriots offensive line. The Patriots offensive line, Brady has been blessed with pretty much a good offensive line almost his whole career. Going to have one of the worst offensive lines that he's had in some time. So, I think that's going to be some of the interesting stuff around there. It's very hard for me to really put together any sort of long-term projection on this team, mostly because it just can go in so many different directions. And I think we're going to see right there in week 1, right off the bat, how do the Bucs line up versus a team that has all the things that the Bucs don't have, which is continuity, long-standing head coach, deep-rooted culture, talent in every single aspect of the game, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, offensive line, defensive line, cornerback, like just everywhere. How do the Bucs line up? And you're going to get that benchmark right there in week 1. And I think if the Bucs play competitive in week 1 versus the Saints, then I think that's going to be – then the Bucs might be really good, even if they lose. But on the downside, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bucs, lose by double digits and maybe keep it close and lose down the line. I could see it going in a ton of different ways. All I know is if the Bucs don't come together week 1, that's not a red flag for me. I don't expect them to necessarily come together week 1. And if they do, then they're ahead of schedule. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Well, and yeah, their schedule after week 1 is actually pretty easy overall. They play Carolina, Denver, Chargers, Bears, Packers, Raiders, Giants. So there's a lot of winnable games in that stretch before they play the Saints again. And they follow up with a Carolina and the Rams and then KC before their bye. So they have a lot of games before their bye. But, 7 of 10 of them are very winnable. And in fact, they probably should win.
Mm-hmm.
So, week one, no matter what happens, even if they got blown out because they just couldn't protect Tom Brady, I wouldn't, there was no preseason. This team's going to need some time to get it together.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of opportunity for this team to really find their footing. And I think that's ultimately what I'll be looking for throughout the season.
Exactly. And I think this defense also is underrated. So they return 10 of 11 defensive starters. And this was a defense that outperformed, I think, a lot of people's expectations. They had some of the most sacks, got some of the most pressures. It was really just the secondary that was kind of the weak point for them, and it kind of continues to be. But, you get Carlton Davis, get another second year of experience under his belt. They drafted Antoine Winfield Jr. I've been hearing a lot of positive things out of camp about him. So I think there is some promise there. And then the other thing is just is great of things that sometimes Jameis Winston can do. He's a net negative because he threw for 5,000 yards last year. I think Tom Brady can throw for 5,000 yards this year, but he also threw 30 interceptions. I mean, that seems fake, to throw 30 interceptions. And what also seems like fake is that he threw 7 touchdowns to the other team. 7 pick sixes. That's 42 points, or 49 points. And the team still went 7-9, even though the offense gave up almost 50 points. The offense gave up almost 50 points, and they still went 7-9. Tom Brady's not going to do that. Tom Brady is not going to throw 30 interceptions, and he's not going to throw any more than 1 pick six over the course of the year. So just that in itself is going to save the team 40-plus points. You add 40-plus points to a 7-9 team, I think you can squeeze out an additional 2, 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 wins.
Yeah, and it's not and you got to take the demoralizing effect of those type of plays. I mean, it's it really can crush your whole team's spirit. So, like we said, even if Tom Brady is Peyton Manning-esque and he can't throw the ball long and blah blah blah, he's got such weapons on both sides of the ball. He may not have to do as much as we even think he could do. And if they do need to get in a shootout, he's got the weapons to go toe to toe. So there's a lot of flexibility with this team if the offensive line can just kind of hold up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. It's gonna be an exciting season. This is gonna be an exciting division. So one thing before we close, we're about to wrap up here. I think we close on, and this is actually something I haven't thought about until I'm about to ask it now. So I know I'm also catching you off guard, but what's your Super Bowl pick? What's the matchup and who's going to win it? What are your thoughts there? Since this is our last preview podcast.
Yeah, this is our last preview podcast, though we will have one more about the intro to Sportfolios and kind of a week 1 preview as well, specifically. But as of right now, it's hard. So I'm going to avoid the obvious. I think Chiefs have a very good chance of repeating if you want to go the obvious route. Let's say Patrick Mahomes gets a little banged up. They struggle in a playoff matchup. I'm going to pick the Colts. I think Phillip Rivers is going to finally get his opportunity to be in a Super Bowl and see how he fares. Probably lose it. And I'm really torn because I've been a Bucs fan my entire life with a lean to the Bears as well, but really my heart's been in the Bucs. I'm from Florida. So I haven't cared about the Bucs in 15 years. But this team is so talented, especially, and then with Brady on board, I don't know if I'm just going to buy the hype. But if it's not the Bucs, I would have to go with the Saints. So I'm going to take my homer side out of it and say I'm not going to choose the Bucs, though I really want to choose the Bucs. And I'm going to say the Saints figured out in the playoffs finally. And you're going to have a Saints-Colts rematch with via the Peyton Manning, Drew Brees. Except this time it's going to be Philip Rivers. And the Saints are going to pull it out again and beat the Colts in the Super Bowl. So that's no one's going to be predicting that one. So that's mine.
I like it. I think, again, Super Bowl picks this early on in the year, especially with all the crazy variables at play this year, it's pretty much a crapshoot. And, to our audience listening, we're sharing this information just for fun because by week 3, Zach and I's views could completely change. And this is one of the reasons why we really don't, put a lot of money down on futures specifically, especially these types of picks where you have to pick a very specific outcome amongst a lot of different possible outcomes. We'd much prefer kind of yes/no futures. But given those disclaimers, I'm going to say, again, I think the Seahawks are a team that continues to kind of fly a little bit under the radar. They were, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, 1 yard away from swapping sides with the 49ers and getting the bye, and everything could have played out differently. I think Russell Wilson, is definitely one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Not just one of the best quarterbacks, but one of the best talents, one of the best leaders in the NFL. And, he kind of continues to get more and more talent surrounding him. They completely refurbished the offensive line. Now, it might not be better, but at least it's different. And it was just bad in the past. So, get Metcalf another year. The defense looks better. Again, questionable coaching in my opinion, but given that is the case, I think there's a lot of constants. I think the team is slightly better than last year, and they could have went to the Super Bowl last year. So I'm going to pick Seahawks coming from the NFC. And then the AFC, I think one of the points you mentioned earlier really resonated with me was young Hall of Fame quarterbacks don't necessarily take years off. And if he did take a year off, it was maybe last year. And so, with Mahomes, this great talent surrounding him, a weak defense, but maybe not as weak as it was a year and a half ago or at the beginning of early last year. They have great head coaching, continues to be opportunity. So I think I'm going to go with Chiefs and Seahawks, and the Chiefs repeat. It will be the first repeat in many years.
I like it. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard if all things are created equal and the Chiefs are healthy. It's super hard to fade them because, and to the Chiefs' point, there's so many ways for them to beat you. Mm-hmm. If their defense is as good as it was last year, and that's just like a top 20 defense, even. Yeah. We saw Mahomes have 3 comebacks in the playoffs unparalleled. It's just. He's so good and dynamic. It's just so hard to bet against them. So, yeah, I agree with I like your picks.
Yeah, very tough to go against them. And again, to your point, I mean, there was cracks in the Chiefs last year, losing by double digits every playoff game in the Super Bowl. But even with those deficits, they still couldn't lose. So it's like you can get a 10-point head start at the beginning of the game, and even still can't. They come back around and
if you take the playoff game they last lost, they should have won that. I mean, they didn't get the ball in OT, right? Patriots went down, got a touchdown, exactly. And the game was over. We all know if they did get the ball, I mean they would have won. So
and even prior to that, there was a very questionable penalty
that's right.
on the Chiefs, and that would have kind of ended a Patriots drive. So there was a lot of again, like individual plays distorting entire outcomes, and then on the downstream effect distorting people's perceptions of what happened. And then you have this kind of revisionist history in people's minds. And that's where we can come in as sports bettors and discern the nuances and the distinctions between those events. And that's how you can really, extract value. So we actually have a parallel here between the Chiefs and the Seahawks, and both were kind of inches away from a completely different outcome. That outcome didn't happen. But just as potent as say the Niners. And I don't think that, a team like the Seahawks, for instance, is getting as much respect as a team like the Niners. So that wraps up our previews of all divisions and for this episode of the NFC South. So thanks for listening. It's been an exciting start, a completely uncharacteristic start with no preseasons. So it's going to be a wild season, but we're looking forward to partnering with you and helping you make plus EV decisions over the course of the season and see your bankrolls rise all the way through January. So with that, we'll see you on the other side, and that's the closing bell.